Hello watch enthusiasts, today I'd like to do the follow-up to my Ultimate Rolex collection, and this is the Omega version of that. So it's 5 watches in this instance which really appeal to me in the present Omega range and in Omega's past. So the first watch is the Railmaster. Now the Railmaster has a bit of an interesting history really. So this watch was the sort of third and less well-known brother, if you will, of the sort of epic trilogy of Omegas launched in 1957. So in 1957, the Speedmaster, the Seamaster, and the Railmaster were all launched as watches designed for professionals. Now, the Seamaster immediately caught on because a lot of people enjoyed swimming, and along with the Rolex Submariner, which had come out recently, a few years before that, it really fitted in perfectly. The Speedmaster was also very popular because of its chronograph function, but the Railmaster, with its anti-magnetic properties, never really caught on because of its simple design. But Omega decided to resurrect the Railmaster style in, I believe, the 90s, late 90s, in this particular incarnation, which I particularly love. So, as I said, this watch features the anti-magnetic properties, which are important in a sort of a Milgauss style watch, which this watch is. But it's also very legible with lume and so on, to make it the ultimate sort of engineer's watch, if you will. And I personally find the design extremely elegant. It's very simple, very minimalistic, but very, very well done and built for function. Now, sadly, this watch has been discontinued, but I would get the smaller version, which features the centre second hand, because my wrists can't take the enormous 49mm, I believe, version with the sub-second dial, which is just as lovely as this one, but is just too large for my wrist. Now, the next watch, which would be utterly necessary for my perfect Omega collection, would be the Speedmaster Man on the Moon. It's such an icon that it's just such a well-known piece that it has to be in a perfect collection. You know, it's the watch that took the astronauts to the moon. Need I say more? So it timed all the missions, apart from, I believe, one of the Apollo 15 watches did fail during the flight. And was in fact replaced by a Belova, which they of course have made a reproduction of recently, which is also a watch I need to have a look at really. But that's a different story altogether. And of course this is the manually wound version with the plexiglass crystal, which really is the classic version. Now, if I were to buy one of these, really I would quite like a used one, so quite a slightly beaten up one. With some patina on it, because seeing as it's a watch which was worn during the space flights, I sort of want one that looks as though it's been used properly in a professional environment like space. Of course, getting a NASA one is near impossible, and these days is pretty much impossible. I would like one which looks like it's been used. Now, one feature that particularly draws me to the Man on the Moon version of the Speedmaster is the fact that it looks absolutely wonderful on any strap you throw at it. It'll look very dressy on a leather strap or a crocodile strap. It'll look very sporty on a metal bracelet, or very military on a NATO strap. So really it can be worn in any circumstances, which makes it such a versatile piece that it's perfect to, well, if you have to go travelling, for example, then it is the perfect watch to have alone without any backups, because they are also known to be very reliable. Now, the particular variant of this watch which particularly interests me is the orange and grey version. I just find this so different, and if I had a Man on the Moon in the collection, that would work as the black, sensible Speedmaster. This would be very much the funky sports one. Now, this next watch was really a love at first sight sort of piece for me. This is the re-edition of the Speedmaster Mark II. So the Mark II was originally designed to be a sort of a follow-up to the design of the Speedmaster, to carry it through the 70s. And, I mean, you can tell from the case shape that that really is what it was. But I see this watch as being far more than that. I find this case shape extremely different, and it gives a really different look to the watch, more of an aviation style than a space style of watch. And equally, I find those sort of beveled edges on the case, those polished beveled edges on the case, extremely elegant too. Equally, I find that this watch is a more modern sports watch when compared to the Man on the Moon. So, for example, it's automatic and it has a date, and it has the coaxial escapement. So it has all the modern features of a Speedmaster while retaining that old-fashioned look. It also is water-resistant to 100 meters, so technically speaking, you could go swimming with it. Although I'd strongly advise not trying that with a watch without screw-down pushers. Now, another nice feature is that the tachometer is actually under the crystal, and it's a raised section, giving extra depth to the whole face, which is a feature I particularly loved when I had a good look at this watch. Now, the case of this watch is a very 70s style, tonneau style case, a barrel style case, I suppose, with these nice beveled edges with polishing, along with a sort of sunburst brush on the rest of the case and a straight along brush on the edges and the sides. And the crown and pusher placement is quite interesting, because the crown is actually lower than the pushers, which reminds me a lot of the Speedmaster Reduced, because it was an ETA 2892, I think, with a chronograph module placed on top, which of course meant the crown was lower than the chronograph module, which of course meant the pushers had to be raised, and this watch seems to have that as well. But that isn't necessarily a problem, because it means the pushers are easier to find in the dark, for example. Now we move into the section of Omega which is the closest to my heart. This is the Seamaster. And the first watch which I particularly love is the Seamaster 300, and I don't mean the Pierce Brosnan Bond one, which is of course the most famous 300. I mean the original 1960s 300. So that's the one after the version which the new 300 vintage style watch is based on. And this watch was commissioned for the army, the navy really, for divers. So it had those standard military issue designs, such as that fully graduated bezel and the sword hands. Now it should be noted that the design of this watch really has become the status quo of military divers, and was so for the remainder of the 20th century. So those the bezel style, the dial, the hands, even the case were taken by various other brands when the Navy decided to down budget in terms of their wristwatches, because they couldn't afford Rolexes and Omegas anymore. So they went to CWC, for example, and they produce these days a watch which looks extremely similar to the Seamaster 300. Now, what was notable about these watches was that they came before the Rolex Submariner, the Mil Sub, which are now worth thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds if you find a really good example. And they were only water resistant to 200 meters, whereas the Seamaster was waterproof to 300, as the name might imply, and featured technology which was far superior to that on the Rolex. And this meant that actually a lot of military divers preferred the Omega to the subsequent Rolex. Now, an interesting design feature of this watch is that it has a two-piece case back, which has been seen actually on various other Seamasters, the last one being the Seamaster 200, which I'm hoping to get hold of in the near future, which enabled the water tightness of this watch to become greater as the depth increased due to the pressure pressing the pieces of the back of the watch together more tightly. Now, with regards to the Watchco reproductions of this watch, so I suppose they're not reproductions because they're made from original parts. I don't really care for them. I'll be honest. I'd prefer to have a watch which was worn, in a military situation, which has a few dings and nicks, but has been produced, by Omega in Switzerland. Equally, I don't know how well the Watchco prices will hold on those watches, so I'd rather stick to all Omega. This final watch is definitely my favourite Omega. It's the Seamaster 1000, and it is the ultimate diver's diver from the 70s. So this watch was a watch designed to be the successor to the Seamaster Ploprof, and through a variety of reasons, I don't think was used by Comex in the end, because Omega had a quarrel with them over placing a helium release valve on their watch, and Omega refused, so they moved on to the Rolex Sea Dweller. But that's a whole different story. Now, these watches have these lovely blue dials with these traditional plongeur-style hands, typical of Omega, with a big, fully graduated bezel. And I absolutely adore this design. It's just such a classic 70s design, but it's such a functional watch too. Here's a photograph of it sitting next to its sort of smaller brother, if you will, the Seamaster 600, the Ploprof. And you can see from the dial it actually has some differences. So its dial has been simplified, which I like. It doesn't have those longer hour markers, which I was never too keen on. It also doesn't have the push button for the bezel, which some people might say makes it an inferior diver as far as professional divers go. But I don't think so, because I've heard stories of the button coming off, or being cracked or not broken, and preventing the bezel from being used, making it a useless dive watch under the circumstances. Whereas the Seamaster 1000 didn't have that at all. It also has a more soft case design in terms of the backing, which makes it far more comfortable. On the topic of the backing of the watch, you can see in this photograph it has these sort of slits along the back of the watch, which allowed for sort of ventilation between the wrist and the watch, making it more comfortable. Equally, it's got these edges which are beveled off, which means that the watch can move on the wrist. And seeing as this is a very, very large watch, those were imperative in terms of making the watch more comfortable. And you can also notice that they went for a very different design to the 300 in terms of how to make it waterproof. Rather than going for the approach of having a case back which was made up of several pieces, which meant that it would tighten underwater, in this instance they just decided to remove the case back altogether, and thus remove that point of entry completely, which I must say does have its advantages. Now, interestingly, this watch really did become very, very popular among professional divers, like this photograph of one of my personal idols, if you will, which is Jacques Cousteau, the extremely famous explorer. And this watch was particularly favoured because it had an acrylic bezel, I believe, or a plastic coated bezel, which meant that if you did scratch it, the numbers wouldn't come off, so it would still be legible. Equally, that 1,000-metre water resistance that I haven't really talked about is just an incredible feat for the 70s. Very, very few watches these days can take that sort of pressure, and this watch was able to do that that long ago. Well, thank you very much for watching. Do please share your ultimate Omega collections in the comments down below. So thank you very much for watching. Do please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, because this is still a small channel, and it takes a lot of time and work to produce these videos. So thank you very much for watching. This is On the Watch Guy, over and out.